So this event is being held by LISSA, Library and Information Science Student Association, Rutgers University student chapter of the American Library Association. Everyone in the program is automatically a member, and we encourage you to be on the lookout for events like this so you can be involved. You can find our information on our webpage, through Rutgers and my Facebook page, and in your emails for future events. We will be having another speaker towards the end of April, so keep an eye out for that notice and feel free to reach out to us with any questions. On another note, LISSA is recruiting for leadership positions in the next academic year. So we have the form up on our Facebook page, and we'll have it on our website, and we will send it out via email. Please consider filling out the survey, and leadership positions are open to online students, and that is encouraged. So this talk will be about 45 minutes total. We have a 30-minute talk with Nancy Kranich and a Q&A for 15 minutes. We ask that if you have any questions, you put them in the chat box. So to introduce myself and LISSA, so you know who's speaking, my name is Allison Newrohr, and I am co-president of LISSA, and I'll let the leadership team take this time to introduce themselves and their roles.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm co-president, and I also update the website and social media.
And I'm Eden, and I am the secretary of LISSA.
Great. So with all that being said, I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker for the evening. Nancy Kranich is a lecturer and special projects librarian at Rutgers. In addition to teaching classes and working on special projects at Rutgers University libraries, Nancy served as president of the American Library Association from 2000 to 2001 and is extremely active in various associations. She focuses on civic engagement and the notion of libraries as a place to practice democracy. Today, Nancy will discuss opportunities to leverage your library career aspirations through participation in library and information science associations. She will share the career path that led her to become ALA president, how she used early participation to leverage her career path, and how her work engagement communities transcended her ALA presidency. Hello, Nancy, and welcome to LISSA's virtual meeting. We're so lucky to have you here with us tonight. Before we get to our questions, is there anything you would like to say?
Well, I just delighted to be here with you, and I thank Alice and Chelsea and Eden for setting this up. And hopefully we will be all stars at Zoom as we move along with all this remote work together.
Sounds good to us. So our first question to you, Nancy, to kick us off is, students are looking for ways to best leverage themselves to achieve their professional goals. What early roles do you feel best prepared you for not only getting to fulfill the work as president of ALA, but in getting to that point of your professional career in the first place?
Yes, well, that's a great question. So I'm thinking back, way back since I've been, at it for a while. I graduated in 1973 from the University of Wisconsin Library School, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as the journey that I took, and focus on what I've learned and the inflection points along the way. So I've got some slides that are just visuals to give you a sense of my experience. So my career path was really not intentional. It was much more serendipitous. I kind of just fell into things. So I haven't spent a lot of time ever really talking much about it. So I had to think hard when we were preparing to give this talk, to think about what is it in the experience that I really wanted to share with you. So as I said, it wasn't the kind, I didn't sort of plan it out in a way that I've met several people who, wanted to be a library leader, and they had their career mapped out, and they went to leadership training, and they were going to do 5 years in this job, and then they were going to move on to these different things. I never thought of my career that way. So how did I get started? Well, the first serendipitous experience, I started studying at the university library when I was an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin as a sophomore, because I needed better habits. Mm-hmm. And one day I was leaving a class, and the person who worked in the part of the library where I studied was leaving the class with me. He took the same class, and he told me he had to go and quit his job because he had mononucleosis. And so I said to him, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Can I have your job?" So he takes me with him to his boss, and he says, well, he had to quit, but here was a substitute. This was for a student job. And she said, fine. So off in my library career I was. So I studied at the library, and then I got this job. But I think it was the kind of thing that happened to me along my career. And then I got, I showed a lot of interest in the different kinds of jobs they assigned us to do. So they trained me to do more than I would have done otherwise. But after all of that, and dropping out of library school once, thinking, well, maybe this wasn't for me, but then finding, well, the only jobs I could get were library jobs because I had library experience. I went back to library school, and I had a lot of serendipitous type of events after that. So here's one of my journeys once I got a real job. I might add that I had lots of jobs when I first was both studying and when I got out of library school. And one of my former professors came to New York when I was living there, and he said to me, you just are not a person who's going to stay on any job very long, because I was, 8 months here and 2 years there, and I had these different experiences. And it turns out that I ended up spending 25 years once I got to NYU. But before I get into that part of it, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I got involved with library associations. So my first series of jobs were in Connecticut. And the first one was only 8 months. It was not a good fit, let's put it that way. But then I had already made friends in the region. I got very involved with some of the regional librarians, and I got a tip that a job was open at the Bridgeport Public Library. So I went for an interview, got the job, and the week I started, Leslie Berger, who is also president of ALA and who teaches in this library school, also started. She was on a grant, and I was told part of my job would be to work with her on this grant. So the two of us did amazing work. We created a community information service. So I know a lot of you are interested in my interest in community engagement. Well, I came to that job with an interest in community, but that's part of what I did there in very early days when libraries, this was a really in thing to do in the early and mid 70s. So Leslie and I were association junkies. We went to the Connecticut Library Association, and speaking that year was John Barry, who was the editor of Library Journal, who we all worshiped, and Patricia Glass Schumann, who worked at Library Journal at the time, and she had already really emerged as a library leader. And we were like two, kids going to a rock concert. We went up to them and we introduced ourselves, and actually they became lifelong friends of mine. So, it really paid off to go to that state association. But when I was first in Connecticut at the 8-month job, I got a chance to take a one-day bus tour to New York with Hartford area librarians to go to ALA when it was in New York. And so I went, you had to leave at 6 in the morning. I went for the day. It was so exciting, except it was 103 degrees outside and the air conditioning broke at the hotel. And so it wasn't the best introduction, but it was still so exciting to be among, all these librarians, and in those days, it was mostly library leaders. It wasn't as heavily participating. It didn't have as heavy a participation from the field. So 2 years later, ALA was in Chicago, and Leslie and I decided we were going. We didn't get time off, and we did not get any money, but it didn't matter. So we drove from Connecticut in her new car. She didn't even have a radio, and off we went to Chicago, and it was breathtaking. It was so exciting. We stayed at my freshman roommate from college's apartment. She was in Alaska on a tour or a cruise. So we stayed there and we took the subway downtown every day. And it was just an amazing introduction to a world of networks and working with all kinds of people. So clearly the work of being in ALA allowed me to start leveraging, being more a part of a broader field.
Great, thank you so much. Eden.
Yeah, sorry, unmuting was more challenging than I thought.
Yeah.
Nancy, so you are a leader on issues of intellectual freedom and civic engagement and promote libraries as a place to practice democracy. Did your passion lead you to participate in community or committee work early on? From what you were just saying, it sounds like a lot of it was serendipity, but what motivated you to start getting engaged, and how did your involvement shape your professional career?
So I started off by telling you it was serendipitous, but once I found a job that was really interesting when I got hired at NYU, which I ended up going back for a second master's degree. When I was in Bridgeport, I got laid off, not once, not twice, but 3 times. But I never went off the payroll, but I fought it every time. But after the 3rd time of getting laid off, they had, the week after I was hired, they froze all jobs, and then they started laying people off. I became a test case for the whole state of Connecticut. It was interesting. So I decided I was really interested in community and how things worked in the public sector. So I applied to go to graduate school in public administration at NYU. And one of the reasons I did was because I had gotten really into being close to New York, and I was in New York all the time, and I just wanted to be in New York. So I was following my passion of interest, but also where I wanted to be. So I went to visit the person they assigned to be my advisor, and he said, well, we have a graduate assistantship open for a librarian because they'd laid off the librarian in public administration. And was I interested? And I said, yes. I was quitting my job after 3 attempted layoffs, and I was moving to New York. So I followed my passion that way. And when I got to NYU and started in the program, I made a date to meet the new library director because he had been at the Atlanta Public Library. Not very common for a public librarian to jump to an academic. There's been a few, but in those days it was very uncommon. And he had run a community information service. He had a big national grant, and I wanted to talk to him about that because that was my passion. Well, we got to talking, and we became quite the colleagues, and he created a job for me when I graduated. I had qualified as the first class of presidential management interns that Jimmy Carter had launched, and I went for interviews all over. I was a freebie to federal agencies, and I was recruited by Donna Shalala, who was at HUD at the time, in the policy office, and other jobs, one at the National Agriculture Library, government printing office, HEW, all kinds of, you don't even know these acronyms anymore because they're changed, all these agencies, but I was recruited heavily, but my passion was working with libraries. So I decided to turn it down and start working for the director of the NYU libraries, Carlton Rochelle. And he was bigger than life. He was one of these people that not only was my mentor, we worked together for 25 years, which is amazing because I had been this gypsy up until that time. But when I landed because every day was so exciting at this job, and it was pretty intimidating at first. So one of the things I learned is that you probably don't want to start a job that you're already good at if you want to stay at it for a while, because every day was a new experience. My first week at NYU, I was asked to write a memo, which I'd never written a memo in my life, to the president of the university as to whether or not we should host a Soviet book fair. It would be part of détente. And it was like, whoa, this is really big stuff. So I had to learn how to write a memo, how to think about very big issues. And my boss for 25 years was always into big issues. So I always had a passion for government. I got this degree in public administration. Well, he came from Atlanta in 1976. And who got elected from Georgia in 1976? Jimmy Carter. So my boss, Carlton Rochelle, knew the whole Carter gang. And he was the toast of the town in Washington. So he would, present himself as a key player in the library field. Everybody wanted to connect with Carlton because he was so connected. And he'd send me off to visit the Washington office, to write testimony for him and do different things. And he had this amazing array of contacts. So one of them was Andrew Young, who you may remember. He became the UN, the secretary, or the what do we call it? The United Nations representative. So he would call, these people would call up, after our assistant would leave at night, I'd answer the phone, it is Andy Young, sure, right? And Jimmy Carter, all these people so he was a big thinker and he just pushed me into it. And did I know what I was doing? I didn't. But it was like every day was an exciting new experience. It was never dull. So in the meantime, I became chair of the Metro New York area legislation committee. From there, I got on the New York Library Association legislation committee. Now, during that period was when they had the White House Conference on Libraries, the first one, and they had this unknown governor named Bill Clinton as the keynote. And each state had a governor's conference as well. So there was all this activity going on around who we were and working with citizens and legislators and leaders. So it was a very exciting time. When I got appointed to the NYLA legislation committee, the chair was so amazing. And she would take me with her on her legislative visits. And she was just an incredible mentor to see somebody who was really good at it and be able to shadow them. So it was a really wonderful experience. So from there, I got appointed to the ACRL Leg Committee after the president of ACRL came to visit. So I went there. And then as in that role, I became a member of the Legislative Assembly. And then they made me chair the Legislative Assembly. So I had just sort of gone from one role to another in these associations. And each one was so exciting and a great experience. So it allowed me to take my passion for this work and really start to play out. And I was a person that stepped forward. And I think stepping forward is something that's really important. If you believe in something, step forward. Don't think that, you don't have a place there, because none of us have a place there. We carve our own place. And I like to say, just say yes. So through my work in New York, I got to know E.J. Josie, who then became president of the American Library Association. And he put me on this new committee to form a coalition on government information. So I'm on this committee with all these super seasoned people, and I said yes. They wanted to do an inventory of groups that we can invite to be in the coalition. I said, sure, I'd work on that. Well, sure enough, I get to work, and the chair of the committee says he had to step down. So who had done the work? Me. I just said yes, right? So I become chair of this committee, and from there we built this amazing coalition of 50 national groups that opposed the major cuts to access to government information during the Reagan and Bush 1 years. And it was a very exciting time. We had groups like the ACLU, the AAAS, the scientists, the Society of Professional Journalists, all those nonprofits that you hear of, the interest groups in Washington, they joined us. So I created this amazing network of people that I met through this work. And we worked really hard to oppose all of these actions that we disagreed with. So it allowed me to build networks. And I think that's these are sort of my lessons that I want to share with all of you. I built these amazing networks through this work. So one of the ways I built the network was through getting to know all these groups. We then started having Freedom of Information Day events, and we started an award called the James Madison Award. So people wanted to point out on Freedom of Information Day, which is James Madison's birthday. We just had it, March 16th. People wanted to use that convening to point out bad behavior. But there were a group of us that said, well, why don't we point out good behavior? So we started honoring people who did good things. And we honored, our first honoree was Senator Patrick Leahy, who was an amazing person. And I got to work with him very closely, and who was his legislative director, a man named John Podesta. So who you may know, famous for other reasons. So, you know, I got to work with people like that over the years. And the people, the awardees, I did Nina Totenberg from National Public Radio, and Brian Lamb from C-SPAN, and lots of legislators, senators, all kinds of heroes of this work. But you build these networks, and so I got to know all these public interest group people. And as we were working with them, we came up with an idea. It was, he said to us, you spend all your time opposing all these actions. How about if we were proposed what we want instead of just opposing? So we, in my office at NYU, he and I sat down and we came up with a plan to pass something called the GPO Access Act, a law. Well, you know, it sounded like a dream, but we got everybody on board. And the toughest was getting ourselves on board. The librarians, they all wanted this and that, and they weren't so sure, but we got all these groups on board, and we had a little glitch, but it was the first law that passed when Clinton came in '93, and it was sponsored by none other than Al Gore. Remember him? So what I learned from that is that so much of what we do is oppose, but when we start to reframe the discourse, which is what we had to learn to do, and tell a different story, then we could get a piece of legislation through. So what is that legislation? All of you use government information. Well, that was not going to be available for free. We came up with the idea it would be available for free just to depository libraries. They told us we'd break the bank of the federal government. But we convinced many people that we should do it. Yes, we can, and we did it. And we got this law passed. And shortly thereafter, when we wanted to care about print materials, they told us if we made print materials still available, that we would break the back of the federal government. So you know that they're gonna put up these objections and you're gonna have these problems. So you have to learn that when you really want something, you have to go for it, and don't let these, you know, naysayers get in your way. So I've got other examples here. The USA Patriot Act, they called us hysterical librarians. John Ashcroft called us that. Well, we stood our ground, and now there's a provision of the Patriot Act they call the library provision. 343 pages, but the word library is never mentioned. But when they were talking about some of this surveillance stuff last year on the Rachel Maddow show, what did she talk about? The librarians, because we reframed the discourse and we told a different story. So we did that with digital divide issues, and we've done that over and over again. And that's what our associations do for us. But we are those associations. So I want to say a little bit more about the power of story and why it's not just working through our associations and being good advocates, it's learning how can we tell our story more, better, more effectively. So as I was working on all these issues around access to government information, I was having real trouble getting the press to cover it. And the American Library Association put out a document called Less Access to Less Information by and about the US government. And we did a wonderful job, as we always do, documenting the problem. But documenting the problem was not the only problem. So we were approached by the Benton and Field Foundations to give us money to amplify our voice more on this issue. And they told us if we were going to get the grant, we had to hire a media trainer. And to do that would mean that we needed to do a better job of telling our story. So they gave me the money to go out and hire a media trainer for ALA. In the first round of training, I couldn't get people to come. So I call up then my good friend, Pat Schumann, and I say, you gotta come to this. You know, I've got these extra spots, you really gotta come. So Pat comes and she said this was the greatest thing that ever happened. She adopted it for her when she became president of ALA, and she adopted our theme, the right to know librarians make it happen, for her theme as president. And we have, ever since that time, we've had media training in ALA. We learned to tell our story better. So then we had the FBI Library Awareness Program. In trying to get more attention for these issues I was talking about, I got called by my colleague up at Columbia who told me she'd been visited by the FBI. So I'm talking to the New York Times reporter, a reporter who's still there years later. And I'm telling him about all these issues we're trying to deal with. Yes, I'm going down my long list. And then I tell him about the FBI, that FBI had been visiting libraries. 2 weeks later, front page of the New York Times, he wrote the story about the FBI Library Awareness Program. So that's how the story got out. And it was amazing how much we affected public discourse. And we did the same with the Patriot Act. We've done it with other kinds of issues. Just last week, we got Macmillan finally to back off to allow for ebooks in libraries. So when we tell our story well, it resonates not with us only, but it resonates with the public. So I'll finish this by saying that ALA is a place that I learned to practice democracy. So what does that mean to practice democracy? So I wrote a book called Libraries and Democracy when I was president of ALA, and I want to add that I just this week had come out in Library Quarterly an article called Libraries and Democracy Revisited. I just did an article looking back what that was about and what it really means now. So we talked about libraries as being the cornerstone of democracy for a long, long time. But when I became president of ALA and adopted the idea of libraries and democracy as my theme, I realized that people really didn't articulate what that meant. But part of what it meant was, how do organizations like associations, which are really our civil society organizations, help us practice democracy? Well, they do it. They taught me, ALA taught me, how do you build consensus? Sometimes doing that among our colleagues is harder than doing that with people in Washington, let me tell you. And I can tell you lots of great stories. How do you teach respect about a diversity of views? How do you even consider those views? How do you galvanize public support? That's what you learn when you participate in our association, or even the state association or local associations. How do you shape the debate? How do you fight for rights like we do with intellectual freedom and copyright and all these other issues? How do you become a leader in this work? How do you advance civic engagement? How do you uphold some of the most important values that are written into our Constitution? And finally, how do you articulate the library message? So I think that that's so part of it, is that message piece, is how do you become a spokesperson?
Great, thank you so much. Our next question builds off that engagement piece, and you talked earlier on about following your personal passion of moving to New York and your professional passions, and how you should step forward and be proactive in building networks for yourself. So being involved is extremely important, and not only does it inform our professional career, but fulfills us on a personal level, and then marries our personal and professional lives and interests. So how would you say that your involvement in work engagement communities served you beyond your ALA presidency and into today?
So I got engaged, literally and figuratively. In fact, I'm at my husband's computer, and I got involved with my husband when I was president of ALA. We met over the digital divide. And so I was still in New York, and he was at the time at Penn State. And so I literally got engaged, but I figuratively got engaged. So when I lived in New York, it was a great place to be a spectator. There was nothing finer than the arts, than the speakers, than you had access to everything. But what you really didn't have access to, at least in my experience in New York, was to be a participant. And I'd written and gotten involved in these ideas around democracy, but I really hadn't had that much chance beyond my work in associations to participate with civil society in our local communities. So after I was president of ALA, I came to that fork in the road that Yogi Berra talks about, and I decided I was going to take it. So what did that mean? Well, I decided to follow my passion. I had to decide, did I want to be a library director, and follow that route? Or did I want to follow some of these routes of issues that I cared about so deeply? So, I thought about, and I certainly applied for some library directorships. But after you've been the president of ALA, it's really interesting to look what happens to people after they're president. It is one of those real inflection points in your life where it changes you and you change it. And so the things that I promoted in ALA started to get incorporated into ALA, but those ideas really became part of me as well. So I applied for and was granted a senior fellowship at the Free Expression Policy Project in New York. after I actually retired from my job at NYU. And that was very exciting. I did a plan for information commons and looked at the public policy implications, the intellectual freedom and implications. And it was a really exciting opportunity to think through much of what I had been talking about and sort of dancing around as president and even before I was president. And that's where I wrote on the Patriot Act too. So, and then I got literally engaged and I left New York, something I never expected to do, but one day I was ready and I haven't looked back, especially right now. And I moved to State College, Pennsylvania, where my husband was teaching. And there I got involved with the National Issues Forums group that was local, which I had gotten involved with when I was president of ALA, but there they had a local group. And I started running all these deliberative dialogues with the community. And I got to know people in this community in such a different way and help them work through really tough issues. And it was really addictive for me. I thought that I had really found something that was powerful. And so from there, I met Rich Harwood through the Kettering Foundation, which runs the National Issues Forum Institute. And Rich Harwood is the Harwood Institute, which ALA has a partnership now. He and I worked together for years, and we applied for a grant in New Jersey to use the Harwood method to build community in New Jersey. And it was a really tough grant proposal. And we got some great marks and not so great marks from IMLS, so we didn't get the grant. But when later, when a certain president of ALA came along who was really interested in this work, and I had her use Rich Harwood as her speaker, we took the grant that we wrote for the state of New Jersey and we made it a national grant, and it became the library's Transforming Communities effort at ALA. So I kept applying these things that I really cared about. I'm a Harwood trained innovator, public innovator. I helped bring the Libraries Transform Communities project to ALA, and as my legacy project now, I have raised $77,000, mostly my own, but from others, to start a Libraries Transform Communities project at endowment. And we just had our first set of applications this year, and they are being reviewed, and some lucky library is going to become the first for this grant round. So ALA has absorbed this work really totally. There's been lots of grants since then. We have a new book coming out. I have a chapter about democracy and community about this work. It's coming out very soon. So that's sort of where I've gone with all this work. And I started, my husband was recruited back to Rutgers to be the dean. He was the former dean before the current deans. And I came with him and got an opportunity to teach at Rutgers, which has been just a great pleasure, because what do you do after you've done what I've done? Well, hopefully you mentor a new generation and you get you all as excited about this work as I have been for so long. And then I taught information policy, a great interest. I taught intellectual freedom, but I finally got the school to allow me to propose and offer community engagement. So you can join me on that path as well. So what have I learned? So follow your passion, whatever that passion may be. It's been really important in my life. I didn't follow the path that most people take, you know, that you're going to move up and you're going to become. I didn't do it that way. All those years when I was recruiting staff at NYU, and to this day, I say to people, it's not the regular things you do that make you stand out. It's the unique things you do. So don't be afraid to follow your passion. And once I had a job that I could be passionate about, I ended up no longer being a gypsy, but I stayed for 25 years and it was such a rich experience. And turn outward toward your community. I've certainly learned that from working with communities, working with ALA, and give yourself a chance to get beyond your building, what I call our edifice complex. Get out of your building. Take your library into your community. Whatever community it is, it's a school. Once you get absorbed in that community, you will find that it just opens up so many opportunities. It'll help you be more relevant, significant, and have greater impact. And hopefully it will transform libraries as well as transform you. So in closing, let me say that I was asked once after I was president of ALA, what was the hardest thing you ever did as president? I had to think about it for a moment. But suddenly it came to me. It's making us believe in ourselves. And let me tell you, when you believe in the power of what libraries and librarians can do, we can do anything. You have no idea how much credibility we have in the world. So whatever your journey is, whatever your path, whether it's just in the building, be proud that you are part of a tradition and a profession that is very meaningful, but you have to believe in yourself and believe in your power. Whether you want to be not your grandmother's librarian, an emerging leader, or just find people that care about things you care about, see yourself as a great association member, a great colleague as a librarian, not just somebody who works in a library, but that's somebody who really understands and cares about the power of this profession to make a difference in the world. So with that, I will say thank you very much and remind people that you need to get counted. This is my latest passion. I'm doing census advocacy, and I'm not leaving without telling you, if you haven't filled it out yet, go to my2020census.com or find the guide we just did at Rutgers Libraries on the 2020 census and make sure you're counted. Because if you're not counted, you're not going to be well represented. All the funding that we get for education and other important issues comes through the census. So I will stop there and say thank you very much for listening. I really enjoyed our time together, and I hope people will use this moment to think more broadly at a very difficult time right now. It's hard to think of turning outward when we're so inward. You know, I mean, all we know is, well, I moved to my husband's office and kicked him out, but I usually only have my office. So we're living in this at this very inward time. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be worrying about the communities that we're part of and recognize that we really are important to them more than ever right now. So thank you all and good luck. And I hope your path and your journey is as exciting as mine has been.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I mean, speaking personally and on behalf of LISSA, we're lucky to be your colleagues. And we want to thank you for being part of Rutgers and teaching us and giving so much to us as students. You've definitely given us a lot to think about today. And as we move through our professional careers, just saying yes, reframing the discourse, building our networks and being proactive about that and telling our story. So how important it is to get involved, especially in areas that we're currently unfamiliar. So we want to thank you very much.
And just remember, the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can. You don't have to be an expert to do it. You can learn. You know, I didn't even know how to write a memo when I had to, decide what to do about Soviet détente back in the days when it was still the Soviet Union. So good luck all. I so enjoy our time together. And I'm not sure you mentioned that I'm also your faculty advisor. So
yes.
I'm so lucky. So I really appreciate the work you do and good luck with those careers.
Thank you.